It is nearly 4:30 in the morning in Moscow, and as you can see here, troops are cordoning off the Kremlin and the presidential administration. This is just the latest in a series of troubling developments that have been happening over the last several hours in a clash that has escalated into an all-out confrontation between the Wagner Group leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and Russia's top military generals. Tonight, as Matthew Chance just touched on a moment ago from Ukraine, Prigozhin is claiming that a helicopter that was firing at civilians has been downed by his mercenary forces. He said this in a taped audio message that was posted on Telegram, where he has been posting most of his updates. He did not give any further details, and I, of course, should note we can't verify his claim tonight. Neither he nor the Kremlin are exactly trustworthy sources of information. In a moment, we are going to speak to the former Defense Secretary Mark Esper for his take on what is happening in Russia. But first, we're going to check in with CNN's Oren Liebermann, who is at the Pentagon. Oren, I imagine officials there are watching this incredibly closely. Have they learned any more? Have they been able to verify any of these claims that we are seeing Prigozhin make?
Not as far as we know at this point. As you pointed out in your conversation with Matthew Chance, and you just touched on it a second ago, it's very difficult to know for sure what's really happening. You have essentially three bodies here, right? You have Yevgeny Prigozhin and Wagner, you have the Russian Ministry of Defense, and then you have the Kremlin, whose arm, at least for information, is Russian state media. And all of those are notoriously unreliable sources of information. Prigozhin himself will either lie or exaggerate. Russian state media, as we've seen multiple times over the past, is not to be trusted, and the Ministry of Defense is not reliable at all in terms of information it's putting out, whether it's on the war in Ukraine or otherwise. But, of course, the U.S. has tracked carefully and closely this power struggle that we're watching perhaps play out in real time right now between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense, a power struggle about who has more influence with Putin, who can get resources for the war in Ukraine, and in the end, of course, who comes out on top. Ever since this emerged as a more clear conflict earlier this year, the U.S., according to officials, has been trying to gather intelligence on it and collect as much as possible to try to find out where this is going. But in terms of what's happening right now and where this leads, that's something the U.S. is watching very closely. There was a sense, and there has been a sense, I should say, over the course of the past couple of hours, that this is something different than what we've seen before. Prigozhin has complained repeatedly about the ineptitude of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Normally, that has followed some sort of Ukrainian breakthrough or tactical success on the battlefield. Not anymore. There wasn't any apparent Ukrainian success that would lead to this. This is Prigozhin openly complaining and perhaps acting, and that's why the U.S. is watching how this plays out so closely, Kaitlan. The question, of course, where does this go from here as we watch these videos from the Kremlin of it being cordoned off? Remarkable in many ways.
Yeah, and the fact that it's all happening in the middle of the night there. The conversations, the correspondence, as we both know, is between Russia and the U.S. has been pretty sporadic when it comes to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and top Russian generals. How are they assessing, how to verify these claims of what that looks like?
That's an excellent question. The U.S. has its own sources of intelligence, whether it's a SIGINT collecting signals intelligence or human intelligence, to try to get a better sense of what's really happening here. And as valuable as that's been over the course of the past year and a half as this war has played out, at a moment like this, it becomes even more valuable. The conversations between top military leaders, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley, and their Russian counterparts have been incredibly sporadic, but there has been repeated, if not truly regular, outreach here to try to keep those lines of communication open. I would speculate or imagine that this is one of those cases where you try to reach out to try to talk to your counterparts to at least get a better sense of what's happening there. I can't really imagine the Russians would answer the phone right now to try to explain what's happening until they have a better handle on this.
Yeah, it seems like they're a little busy. Oren Liebermann, thank you. I'm joined now by the former Defense Secretary under former President Trump, Mark Esper. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight so abruptly as we are tracking these breaking developments out of Russia. What is your sense of what's going on?
Well, who knows? And who knows what's real and what's not real? I mean, this is inevitable in some ways. As your previous commentators have said, this has been building for a long time. Prigozhin has been very critical of the Russian military, particularly Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister. So this has been building up for some time. If you recall, a few weeks ago, after the siege of Bakhmut, if you will, ended, there was a confrontation between Wagner and regular Russian troops on the ground. in that area. And now we have today Prigozhin saying that his forces were attacked, where the airstrikes were conducted upon him. So this has been building for quite some time. And if it is indeed real, it has a number of implications.
Yeah, I mean, they are straight up accusing him of trying to carry out a coup, maybe a military coup. I mean, it's not the actual military that would be doing it. This is the mercenary group that was doing it. But do you believe that the Kremlin's taking this very seriously, given it's 4:30 in the morning there, and they're cordoning off the presidential administration?
Yeah, look, I think they absolutely are taking it very seriously, given what we're seeing on the ground. But I don't see this as a coup in the sense that he is trying to topple Putin. He and Putin go back to St. Petersburg in the 1990s when their relationship first formed. And Putin has tolerated Prigozhin's outspokenness now for nearly a year. So there's that at play. This is clearly between him and the defense ministry. But I think the tricky thing here that we all need to keep in mind is this is more than just a drama between Shoigu and Prigozhin, or between Wagner and the Russian military. There are other players here that are affected and may be looking for opportunities. You have within Russia pro-Ukrainian elements. You have anti-Putin elements. You have the far right who believes in many things that Prigozhin is saying about the ineptitude of the Russian army and how weak it's performed on the battlefield. So you have any number of players out there who are looking for an opportunity here, or trying to assess what may happen next. And then you have, the Russian soldiers who are on the front lines right now in Ukraine and they got to be wondering, what is going on with my leadership? And when you're dealing with a force that is, a fair number of conscripts who don't want to be there in the first place, you really got to ask yourself, what does this do to their morale? Particularly since what I think has been could be the most damaging part of this right now is the fact that Prigozhin has belied the claim by Putin early in the war, at the beginning of the war, that this is all about threats from Ukraine, that this was denazification, et cetera, et cetera. Prigozhin has undermined all of that by saying it's not real. Putin was lied to by his generals. This is about senior officials and oligarchs wanting to plunder the rest of Ukraine. I think that does incredible damage, well beyond what happens in the next 24, 48 hours when it comes to the war effort and Putin's credibility.
Yeah, because that's not coming from a U.S. president or some leader in Europe. He's basically saying this idea that it was the threat of NATO aggression was made up by the top brass in Russia and their corrupt elites. And he said it was, quote, needed for a bunch of scumbags to triumph and show how strong of an army they are. Mark, you've been in the...
Yeah, so...
Well, I was just
going to say, just think if you're, a Russian mom and dad, asking yourself, what? I thought this was about defending Mother Russia, and all of a sudden we realize it's not, that it's Prigozhin is telling the truth. And again, if you're a Russian soldier on the front line trying to beat back the Ukrainians right now, you got to ask yourself, is it worth giving my life for these clowns at the top?
Yeah, and that had already been an issue they were dealing with. You have been in the seat that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is in right now. What would you do? How do you monitor this?
I would be calling our intelligence community to get the best assessment I could of what's happening on the ground. There would obviously be talks with the State Department and the NSC at the same time going on continuously. I'd be reaching out to the European commander, General Cavoli, who's also the SAC-Euro commander, finding out what his assessment is. Certainly Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. And then I think you have to look at some of your NATO allies, the frontline states like in the Baltics, Sweden, Romania, people who really understand Russia well and know what's going on. See if they have any interesting insights about what may be happening. I would try and tap as many sources as possible to find out what's going on and how the United States, NATO, and others may play a role, may help Ukraine make their way through this next 24, 48 hours as this situation develops.
Former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, thank you for hopping on with us tonight.
Thank you.
And now we go to the White House, where CNN's Jeremy Diamond is. Jeremy, I know you've been talking to your sources there. What are they saying about this so far?
Well, Kaitlan, at this hour, I can tell you that President Biden has been briefed on this unfolding situation, and it's so important to note how fast-moving this situation is inside of Russia. And just like us, the White House is also seeing a lot of this open-source intelligence, a lot of what is coming across on the internet, and they're also, of course, adding to that what U.S. intelligence agencies are actively gathering. Now, I'm told that the White House is actively monitoring this situation. The National Security Council spokesman, Adam Hodge, he said, quote, "We are monitoring the situation and will be consulting with allies and partners on these developments." Now, it's important to note that not only what the White House is saying, but what they are not saying. And what they are not saying right now is they are not calling this a coup. They are not confirming how serious of a situation this is, and they are not confirming any of the footage that we are seeing on the internet, any of that open source intelligence. What I can tell you, Kaitlan, is that the White House has long been monitoring the tensions between the Wagner Group and the Ministry of Defense. This is something that they have talked about as early as January, where they called the Wagner Group a rival power center to the Russian Ministry of Defense. All of that, of course, because of this central role that mercenary group has been playing in Russia's war effort inside of Ukraine. And so this is a situation that's going to have so many implications. The war in Ukraine, of course, foremost among them. But even if you take that out of the picture, just keep in mind the fact that Russia is a nuclear power. And so any kind of power struggle inside that country is going to be hugely significant with a number of geopolitical implications. Certainly something that I'm told the White House is going to be monitoring all night long, and I'm sure the same is happening in key capitals around the world.